401. So I'd like to go ahead and call to order this joint meeting of the Atherton Council study session as well as the Rail Committee. And we have the Rail Committee attendance taken first, and then
Yes. Rail Committee members, Jans?
Yes, here.
Yeah. Lane?
Here.
Kay?
Here.
Dexter?
Here.
Dudley?
Here.
Wynn?
Here.
Ringham?
Here.
Malbeck?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
And Conlon? Absent. And then council members, Lewis?
Here.
Lemprus?
Here.
Weist?
Here.
Vice Mayor DeGolia?
Yep.
Mayor Widmer?
here. Okay. Do we have any members of the public that would like to make a comment on items that are on the agenda? Seeing none? I'm going to close public comments, and we'll move over to the only topic that's on our agenda today is to discuss and provide feedback to staff on the Caltrain business plan and train service in Atherton and the rail policy. As you know, Robert put out a very detailed description of not only the business plan, but also analysis on pending legislation and some high-speed rail things, which was, commend him on the completeness of the pack. And so we'll have a discussion led by Robert, and what he's looking for is, and George is looking for, is direction back on our feedback on their plan and issues, as it said in the agenda, with regards to service at our station. So, take it away, unless, George, you want to say something?
No, Robert's got the floor.
Okay, well, thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the Rail Committee. I appreciate this opportunity and really look forward to receiving your feedback so that as we review the Caltrain business plan moving forward, we have your input in terms of the desires for service here in the town and other ancillary items around the train station. And so the presentation I prepared is primarily for background and to help facilitate discussion. And so I am going to highlight some aspects of the Caltrain business plan in the presentation. You have the full presentation that they presented to the local policymakers group back in December. The plan is currently under development. We also have want to talk about desired service levels here in Atherton, as well as we have the opportunity to talk about the rail policy issues.
Question, Robert, are you going to bring SB 50 into this?
So the discussion of the legislation is solely centered around how it affects our decision making around the rail station.
And it's an important factor.
So when it comes to the Caltrain business plan, they've started their effort last year to envision service over the next 20 to 30 years. As part of this effort, they've began forecasting ridership demand, reviewing the number and length of trains that they might need to have in terms of providing that service. And then centered around that, they're going to be looking at what the infrastructure needs are for providing that type of service, as well as trying to develop the business case regarding the level of investment that would be required.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I have a personal request. Would anybody mind if you turn those, I suffer from migraine headaches and I cannot stand
The
those
lighting?
lights. Sorry.
You want them on, or
Yes.
is that good?
Less is more. It's just those little LED.
The LED ones I just turned on.
I apologize. Thank you. I have a migraine in 15
Okay.
minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm fine.
All right. They'll also be looking at what type of organizational structure and governance things that they need to maintain that service in the future. They started the development of their plan last year and are looking to adopt it sometime near the end of this year. So that's the context in which they're developing their business plan. So looking at forecasts from Plan Bay Area and CCAG, Caltrain's been using that information to kind of forecast what kind of population and job growth will be along the corridor. They're estimating approximately 40% increase of people and jobs within 2 miles of the Caltrain system within San Mateo County.
How do you want to handle questions or comments?
We can take them as they come. So if there's any comments at this point, again, these are forecasts that they've drawn from.
One suggestion, I'd like as soon as possible to start focusing on Atherton,
Okay.
whenever we
Yeah,
get
so my comment on is I looked at the detailed data and I'd like to get more information. I guess maybe you might be able to get it, Carrie. But the growth in Atherton is substantially greater than the growth in Menlo Park. Now, Robert and I discussed this the other day, but you know, it goes back to the housing element item too, is where did they get the baseline data and the growth data, and a lot of it came from this ABAG study that was done years and years ago, where they've identified that Atherton was going to continue to grow, and Atherton has not. And that there were going to be jobs in Atherton, which, you know, some of them are domestic jobs or lawn service type jobs, but there's not commercial here. And so I think what we should do is at least give some feedback with regards to the growth that they're showing, especially in the 2 mile station number, because that number just didn't seem appropriate, that we would be higher than Menlo Park.
It could include other areas like near Redwood City. I mean, it could probably include Facebook, because our station's probably a little closer to some of the Facebook construction than Menlo Park might actually be.
Well, when it's in Menlo Park, I would think that it would be included
Yeah,
in
we
Menlo Park.
can certainly provide input on
That
on
it is a 2 mile radius, and it's based on the fact that we're getting Redwood City's growth numbers for jobs as well as Menlo Park. So we're getting them from 2 big growers.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
why
sorry, Carrie, but you're saying radius, but
It's
not really a radius,
miles
right? Because
long.
it's a 2 miles on either side of the tracks as the tracks go through.
Yeah. So we're getting the Redwood City numbers as well for their growth, all the growth that we're doing up Woodside Road, and all the growth through the Facebook campus, we're getting those numbers. So
let me just step in to
Doesn't seem
clarify.
right.
The chart that Bill is, the mayor's looking at, is the growth projection charts, which actually are is a distance from the station. And so it's a
From the
2 mile
station.
circle
Oh, it
from
is
the
it's a
station,
circle, okay.
which, as Member Kay mentioned, includes growth in Redwood City and.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, they're forecasting by 2040 that ridership during the commute hours can get as high as 8,000 to 10,000 people at the peak for the northbound AM and southbound PM. And to do that, they're looking at a significant increase in number of trains per hour. In general, right now, I think we're running about 5 trains per hour on the corridor during the peak. And so that's looking at upping it to 8 or 12.
There are problems with that also, that in trying to relate their hourly forecasted traffic with their total annual traffic. They're getting a lot more annual traffic in the system than one can justify with a normal pattern of daily traffic.
Yeah, Paul, that's a great idea, a great comment. And then also, if you divide that out just on a straight basis, it's a train every 3.75 minutes.
That's right.
And so now there's a problem with even going from east to west within our town.
Even going,
Yeah.
can you go from east to west?
Exactly.
You know, and these are certainly impacts that we need to discuss. And I'm going to apologize, it's not showing up very well on the chart. But these are some of the service concepts that they were evaluating. Along with them, they had little bands of where passing tracks might be needed with each of those options.
Sure.
Um, And so they've gone through a screening process to reduce the number of options that they're looking for to develop that business case for. And through that process, they've kind of focused on two local/express concepts where you have, let's say, not part of the discussion and not part of the business plan is the forecasted number of trains for HSR, which is in red. But looking at upping on the left side of the screen there, you have upping from the 5 to the 8 peak hour trains. And on the right side of the screen, going from 5 all the way up to 12 peak hour trains per hour for directions. And so,
Just a side question,
Yeah.
the 4-track alignments that are shown, the one with the 16 trains has a lot of 4-track alignments.
Yes.
Is this kind of their final plan for 4-track alignment proposals, or could it change where Atherton would be in one of those 4?
So the way that it's forecasted now, they are not looking at Atherton as an area for 4-track. And so the number of trains impacts how long the passing tracks need to be. And so that's why there are smaller bands and fewer of them on the left side. A significantly larger investment on the right side to accommodate that number of trains. Yes.
Yeah.
Also, from prior meetings, it's my understanding that the right-of-way for Caltrain currently supports 3 tracks for sure. Does it support 4 tracks? Okay, that's what I thought. It does not support, without some eminent domain, they could
Well,
not.
there are significant areas where they would have to acquire some properties, and I think that they're trying to focus some of their, part of their decision-making process, trying to hone in on where those things make sense and where it's easier to do. And so what I wanted to note particularly is that when it comes to planning for stops, you'll notice that Atherton has kind of a little grayed out dot. And so they have yet to determine what the ultimate service level is here in Atherton. That's one of our primary focuses today. And what they've indicated was that they would likely accommodate stops here by stopping in lieu of either Redwood City or Menlo Park on a given cycle. And so it would just basically, if it was coming one direction, it might skip one of the stops on the local train to hit the Atherton station. And they've verbally indicated that that's likely to be in the 1 per hour interval, as identified in their EIR for electrification at this point in time.
But it wouldn't be on anything that's express.
It would be a local, as shown here, it would be on the yellow lines, which are local only trains.
They also indicate, as I understand it here, that in the 2 Sloan stations, Atherton and College Park, service level is to be determined. There's not a firm commitment
That's
to
correct.
even provide 1 train per day. I carry your agreement. Thank you.
Okay, and so just briefly touching on some previously adopted and proposed as well as current proposed legislation, just as it relates to the rail corridor and the station in particular. Last year, the legislature approved authorizing BART to essentially design the zoning around their station. Unless jurisdictions have already adopted things or adopt things that are consistent with that TOD planning around that station, and takes away a good semblance of local control.
And specifically in BART, as I understand it, is on the parking, they have the parking lot.
Yeah, so they have a lot,
It's on their
they have a lot of
their
land.
land.
It's on their land.
Yeah, it's on their
Okay.
land.
But, Robert, just so I understand, what is approved means passed by the Assembly, not
It's-
passed by the
it's law.
Senate? Not,
It's law.
It's law.
it's law.
Yeah.
It's law.
Mhm.
So it's been signed and it's in place, okay?
Yes.
Yes.
And
Okay.
BART is actively pursuing
Yes.
these
Okay.
developments,
Mm-hmm.
actively,
That is correct.
throughout the
I have no
region.
more.
So last year, proposed and not approved was Transit-Rich Housing SB 827 by Scott Wiener, which was proposing to allow for density increases essentially by right along transit corridors, or transit corridors with significant transit stops. That did not pass the legislature, but he's followed up with a proposal currently. It was introduced in December of last year. Kind of a similar track to allow for that. There's some additional blanks in the proposal regarding what one might have to incorporate into their projects, whether it's low, moderate income housing and that kind of thing, to qualify for by right exemptions from local zoning.
May I
And
comment
that's
on
SB
that?
50.
Wait,
That's SB.
And that's SB 50.
may I comment on that just very briefly? I did some research on what SB 50 is proposed to be. So SB 50, what it would do is it would incent developers to develop 5-story buildings and 4-story buildings within a half-mile radius of every train station that is either serviced by a train or by a bus. So within that half-mile radius around a train station, what SB 50 does is it proposes to incent developers to provide what it terms mixed income housing. I'll get to that in a moment. And what it does, it incents the developer to provide that mixed income housing by waiving the cost of providing any parking for these 5-story and 4-story buildings. So the 5-story and 4-story buildings would have no parking. And that,
So it'd be limited.
It's a half
They
a
could
spot,
have
half a
Well,
spot.
But why would
developers don't want to,
Yeah.
because parking doesn't generate money. So I would bet if I were a developer, I would not build any parking. And if I were given an acre of land, build as much housing as possible with as little parking as possible.
Well, I think there's a requirement of a half of a parking space per unit.
Yeah.
no, that's waived. For within a half-mile of a train station, there is 0 parking. That is for the half-mile park, the half space for parking is for other provisions built within SB 50. But for the half-mile within the train, there is 0 parking. That was a little wrinkle. And the rationale is that, so the cost per unit goes down. The cost for developing a housing unit goes down, which makes it more attractive to develop smaller parcels of land.
Where do they stand, 50 and?
It's just been introduced at this point, and I don't think it's gone to any committees yet. There are other pieces of legislation by other folks that are also being discussed that, that will be in the mix as well.
The previous slide you had there, Wiener introduced something in the last session.
Yes.
How close did that come to pass? Did I get to a vote? What
I
was
think
it?
it died in committee.
Yeah, because it was
Not
unlimited.
close, but it was opposed by labor and by affordable housing interests, which the bill's been amended to address their concerns. They're now supporting it.
Well, and
But
also
the other thing,
the-
It's labor that
is,
has to
I
be-
think
it has
it's
to
really
be in
important
labor to
in this
base.
bill, and the LA Times.
There
did an
goes the parking
article
space
on it,
incentive.
And there's a statement in the LA Times, the focus here is about proximity to transit, particularly train stations, but the bill goes beyond that. And we should expect there to be legislation that's gonna go beyond that. And the statement in the LA Times is, and it loosens local zoning restrictions in communities with high median incomes, quality schools, and short commutes to jobs, even if there isn't access to transit nearby. An effort to push development into wealthier areas that might have previously resisted it.
And so we can certainly come back to council for recommendations in terms of responding to that or providing feedback to the legislature and depending on the zoning.
And that is what they call a job-rich hub.
Yeah.
So there are 3 types of hubs. One is, which I was making the point, Bill, one is a rail-centered hub, the half mile. Then there is the Jog Ridge hub, and there is a hub which doesn't pertain to us, but if you had very, very frequent bus service, that's a third type of hub, which would involve a quarter mile.
But we don't have a job rich hub.
Right.
Through the
Okay,
chair.
so,
That's where that,
Yeah.
that's where that would not really
Yeah.
come into play.
If
right
I,
now.
I mean, I might add just one thing. The concept philosophy is to get rid of your car and to force you onto public transportation or the rail. So when you think about it, if you're within that radius, it's to get you out of a car. Therefore, we allow don't have to have parking for the developer, and it's get you out of your car and into public transportation of some sort.
But isn't, I'm sorry, isn't one of the points though that that's one of three different elements that might apply? And it's primarily the one we're discussing today. What I'm hearing is even if we somehow got rid of the station, that wasn't relevant, we still should be prepared for the fact that the state may want to.
In the future.
We'll continue to try to push
Yeah.
it, yes.
but
So-
I don't think we qualify for any of those except for the rail
Right,
stations.
that's correct.
So I would just urge us not to spend too much time focused
Yeah,
on
well, I
That's
say-
not on the agenda.
draft legislation that's gonna be
Yeah.
amended, it's gonna
So,
change, and it's gonna go to the
Yeah,
Senate,
and
yeah.
plus it's not on our agenda
So-
to
so
just
the-
dissect that. We need to just talk about the rail, and then we can consider what SB 50 may or may not do when we're considering, about the train station and the stops.
So,
But we need to keep in mind that these sorts of activities are in the air, and any changes we make in our position today should not be directly responsive to those. I certainly agree with that. But they should reflect the fact that there's going to be more pressure in the future.
Right.
and so we've developed a series of questions to kind of spur your conversation around the business plan and the desired service. These questions essentially are in the report. It's basically, what kind of service are we seeking for Monday through Friday? Where would folks park? How would that type of activity be managed, whether it's shuttle service or bike parking? The holdout rule, we currently have the holdout station with increased frequency. And I think in our rail policy is a desire to remove that holdout rule. What type of safety improvements do we need to really look at when it comes to the increased frequency, and that includes the desire for quad gates. Unfortunately, the exhibit didn't show it really clearly in terms of where those passing tracks might be. But thus far, they haven't shown anything in Atherton for those passing tracks. With the increase in the number of trains, as mentioned earlier, the gate downtimes are really going to be an issue with our mobility. And so, what are we going to do? How are we going to address that issue? The desire for the quiet zone, as well as the possibility of grade separation, what that might look like, given the community next door is looking at separation in Menlo Park. So these are just some questions to help spur the conversation.
So can I start commenting on at least some of these discussion topics, or do we want to?
Well, why don't we go through each of them okay?
Could we back up to the legislation if we're through with that? Because I still think that, I don't think we should just sit here and let it happen. I think you should consider hiring a lobbyist to be real forceful in our position, whatever it is.
The legislation isn't really the central focus of the conversation today, but through, we would have through city manager, whether or not that would be an item for future discussion for the council.
I would urge the council to add that to the next agenda if we wanted to.
Well, I would certainly recommend it, because I think that without it, you're just going to get run over like a bulldozer.
Through the chair. If we figure out what we're doing with the station, it may impact on how we look at whatever downstream related to the state. So use of the station, et cetera, which I think is what we're really trying to talk about as Atherton. And if in fact we make decisions related to that, we can decide how we react legislatively.
Yeah, to the extent that I guess, Mr. Mayor, I'd recommend we focus, at least initially, on our desired level of service and then the implications that has for the station itself. I think are the two big questions.
I would suggest that we schedule another meeting like this very soon to focus on SB 50. Because I think that has a lot of provisions that would require us to lobby to develop opposition. So
Yeah,
even
if we
could
decide
have
to
it
shut the station
in the
down,
next- in
that
the
would be
next
one.
month, I think that would be great.
So if I could ask Carrie, so if in fact the decision was, okay, we don't have a whole lot of service and we would shut the service down, we're still in the corridor, you still maintain your seat
Yes,
on this committee, because we wouldn't want to lose our voice, right?
correct. Well, and I will say that for the last 7 years, the 2040 plan, for the new numbers that have just come out, and with the volume of trains, there's a lot of conversation about not only our station, but as Broadway as well, is what development, because they've looked at everybody's general plan, and even the jurisdictions that have got their general plan done are complaining because they actually have more development on top of that. So the jurisdictions that don't have an open station, Broadway and Atherton, and even the other low-numbered stations, run risk it actually being part of a more service plan. Because every time you stop a train, and if you have 10 or 12 trains on the corridor, you've got downtime. And if you're only picking up one passenger, there is a philosophy that if you're only picking up 1 or 2 passengers, why would you actually want a station, service station? You would want to give your numbers to a jurisdiction like, for example, Redwood City or Palo Alto that can actually pick up, 50, 60 riders at a time.
Yeah.
So that's part of the conversation with our station.
Bear in mind that Atherton had 300 riders a day when we had substantial train service. That may or may not materialize if we got service back. But I wouldn't assume that we're only going to have 1 or 2 riders.
Yeah.
Well, if it was,
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that if service was provided here on a regular basis, I would think it would be easier and more efficient for all the Facebook people who are coming down to be getting off here, because it's almost a straight shot over. And so I think that, I agree with you, I think that the ridership, I think the ridership might actually increase but the traffic associated with that ridership would also increase, creating more havoc.
As to that, I know we're kind of jumping around, but I had asked a question, and I'll ask the city manager again. If that were to occur, and Facebook employees were coming on buses to and from the Atherton train station, do we have any legal ability to say you can't take buses, or is there anything we can do that would discourage that kind of traffic, or would we just have to accept it?
We would have to accept buses on public streets,
Yeah.
and Caltrain lots, as long as they owned and operated it, would continue to allow them in their spaces. If they parked illegally longer than 72 hours,
Right.
block traffic and turning radius and things like that, we'd have some control. But absent that, I don't see
Elizabeth,
it.
It doesn't make sense, though.
Elizabeth had something.
I just
she was
wanted
trying
to make a comment about the level of service. I remember in, I think, 2006, 2007, there was a phone that rang. I answered the phone. There was a survey being done. Do you ever use the Atherton train station? And I said, no, not really. So they were surveying all the residents at that time and determined to close the station. But if the service was open now, and with the amount of traffic increase on 101 and the congestion on our freeways from 2006, 2007 to now, the last 12 years, people will ride the train back and forth rather than drive.
So
and I really believe that we cannot underestimate the level of service that our Atherton train station will garner and on commute weekdays. And aside on the Facebook, large buses, shuttling them from the train station over to Facebook, back and forth. I think that that would, if we don't want the giant buses coming back and forth, and maybe we could negotiate with them to be good neighbors on our streets, to use smaller, like Marguerite shuttle services or something like that, back and forth, and it would be a much better thing than the giant buses.
If I could just push back a little bit on that, I'm sorry, but on the specific point about rider services or levels, the question is not whether people would use Atherton or not use the train at all. The question is whether they would use Atherton when they're now not using it, instead of using Menlo Park or Redwood City. If the Atherton demand is being met by people who can go to Redwood City or Menlo Park, there'd be no additional benefit to Atherton riders except for the fact of a shorter ride to and from the Atherton station.
The difference is Redwood City and Menlo Park have express. You can get to your location in half the time.
But that just reinforces that point.
We'd
I'm sorry, Jim
we'd
was-
like to have hear from Rick and then Malcolm, okay?
I'm sorry.
We've been waiting. So I think the issue for us here is not to worry about the projection of what might happen in the future with legislation or with the ridership. I think we need to do a very focused balance between what are the costs and what are the adverse consequences versus what are the benefits of having the train station open. And I think it's probably proper to look at it in terms of being open like it is right now, only on the weekends, a full-time service or not a service at all. And when I look at it, I actually think there would be increased service if it were open. I think while right now there's only a few people that use it on the weekend, once it became known to be open, there would be more people using it. I seriously doubt it would ever get to the kind of use that it was when most people were commuting to the city, not to Silicon Valley to work. I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I think there would be some impacts on us in terms of parking problems, because we have very limited parking at the Caltrain station. And when the new Civic Center is open, that parking is going to be challenged even more. And I think we would have some issues with either, Uber types of drop-offs or bus drop-offs, and there'd be some impact on our streets. I think there is a serious risk with the potential for state-driven housing mandates that override local zoning. I think that's going to happen in the state. I don't know if it's going to happen with SB 50, but if you just look at the housing shortage that exists in the state, and there's going to be reduced pressure to allow people to move out of the more suburban and urban areas and into the forested areas because of the wildfires. So we're going to see housing pressure in this state, and I think that pressure is natural to come to bear where there's train stations. I think we've gotten used to not using the train station so much. So in fact, on the benefits side, well, I think there is a real benefit to be able to get conveniently to the train station and get wherever you want to go between San Jose and San Francisco. But I think if there were high-rise housing put up, it's not going to reduce traffic on the streets because people are going to have cars. I actually don't think that it's likely that in this location that they're going to build no parking housing, because I think people who would buy those apartments, which I don't think will be cheap, will want parking. I think it's going to put more parking on our streets. When I run that analysis, I come out feeling like, and I don't think it's just the housing risk, because that's an amorphous risk that's out there in the future. I also think there's a safety issue. The train station presents a safety problem for us. So in my mind, I would just, when I balance the costs and benefits, I conclude the costs are greater than the benefits. And I think what Harry said, it indicates, well, Caltrain would be interested in shutting the station down. Why not? It's going to save them a few minutes on the route, and they're not going to want to forego a stop in Redwood City or Menlo Park, which are very popular stations, to be able to service the Atherton station. So how valuable is that to them? I really don't know the answer to that. I think that would be pretty interesting for us to explore, because I think there is value to them to shut it down. And you know, it's not our decision to shut it down, it's ultimately their decision, but there may be some benefit for us to explore that with them.
Okay, Malcolm?
Well, Chris, I have a rather biased view because of my long involvement with the train, and there's several issues. Jim Jantz and I did talk some time ago with people at Facebook. Facebook has taken a very positive approach toward dealing with the problem of congestion, and over half of their employees come other than single passenger vehicles. So they worked on that. We needed to increase our ridership, and so they're very receptive, and it makes sense. Facebook, we've timed the time it takes from getting from our station in the shuttle to Facebook campus, what it is from Menlo Park, what it is from Palo Alto, what it is from California and Palo Alto. And this provides the most efficient service. The pattern of people coming to work at Facebook, if you're coming from the south, you're coming on the train, they used to go into the Palo Alto station, they changed that because it was more congested, they moved that to California. So if you're coming from the south, that's how you're doing it. From the north, I'm sorry, you're coming up on the train and then getting shuttled. It's different from the north. The north, they're doing buses. They would be very receptive to coming down on the train to the Atherton station, which is the most efficient, getting them there, and then having a small shuttle, not a big bus, that would get them there. So if ridership's an issue, we would have a lot of ridership. And we do know, of course, we've gone through this, we worked very, very hard on the train issues. I think it's extremely important. And I make this observation based on legislation about that. It's also true that as people get older, there are more and more restrictions to keep you from driving. The dexterity test, tests every year has been discussed. That was legislation proposed. AARP did oppose that. And so we do know that there is that issue that makes our station very important, particularly as people are getting older. That's one of the factors. A lot of factors, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but the fact is, it's a very valuable asset. Think about this. Even on our own website, we discussed the fact that we were a flag stop for train in 1866. Guess what? The oldest station in this whole state is 1867, a year later, and that's Menlo Park. It's a historic structure. We've had a long history of service. It's growing in importance and the need, particularly as our population does age, and a lot of other factors, which I won't go into. I've got a lot of notes on it, having spent many, many years on the train issue. And I do know if we decided we wanted to have it closed, I can tell you the two greatest fans for that, former executive people of Caltrain, they made sure that we were going to have lower ridership. You know how they did that? We used to have students, particularly from, what is it in Palo Alto? Castellea. Yeah. We had small shuttles coming there with
in Woodside Priory and Menlo School. And Menlo School and Woodside Priory also.
Woodside Priory.
But anyway, they came here with their shuttles so their kids get to the school. Guess what? When these two individuals decided we don't want to serve, the comments that I was told, of course I chaired the Transportation Authority for many years, helped to create that. We created that when we did have a new Measure A. I was the one dissenting vote on a proposal that would have limited the amount of money going to Caltrain was only $20 million, and we were within 2 years of losing the subsidy, which is over half in the state of California. I was very involved with people in that. This is 1980. These are the people, this is when Jerry Brown the first time signed legislation to provide half the funding, which we need. We never would have had the train if we didn't have it. In 1888, 8 years later, we would have lost lost the train service because the entire subsidy was going to end at that point. And the expenditure plan was put together. Tom Union and Tom Nolan, they put 85% of the money into roads and highways. It was only $20 million for the train. That would have been the end of train. And so, two of us fought that. Frank Valiero, who was mayor of Burlingame at the time, and myself. We went to all 20 cities over a 2-month period to get them to oppose that plan. And then with the promise that we would then, in that time we only had, there were 7 members. We had 4 city council mayors of the cities, out of 20 cities. We had 2 members from the supervisors, and we had 1 from San Fran. Frank Canizero was there from Millbrae. And I felt it was an important enough issue for all 20 cities to be involved, and that's what we get restructured. Tom said to me, you'll never get consensus with that many people. I was convinced we would if we did it right, and we did it right. We had 23 members with that. We put together a plan to put the train #1 priority, #1, and we put half the money there, which was a 20-year plan which provided $500 million over those 20 years. That's why we have the service we do. I think it's critical when you look at, we talk about congestion and traffic and impacts and all. We need the transit, and in that case, after a 2 or 3 month period where we were working the entire county in 2 cities, they were very clever. They got them to vote twice, East Philadelphia and San Francisco, in order to try to override what we had. We had the votes. They stayed with us. We had 11 cities voted for that. We put together a new committee. Train was #1, and of course, 2 people, I don't need to mention the names, that were very senior on the Caltrain staff. They said, we don't want to give service to Atherton. They're how do they put it? They said, we're rich. And they had other words too about the community. And so what they did was they closed down our key peak service to get our ridership down. That's how that happened. And so it's just, it is wrong what's happened. And these 2 people in particular love to see us. Oh, gee, we don't want to provide service anymore. I think it's very important to us. It has a long history. And as I say, to me, the 2 critical dates were 1980, when we got the state to support subsidizing that service there. That's what you see here. That was on the caboose of the train. And then 8 years later, we saved the train by having a new Measure A, and that was a 20-year plan. And within 2 years, we were able to buy the right-of-way. We didn't own the right-of-way at that time. And so we bought the right-of-way, and it was in our plan. We put it in our expenditure plan. Unfortunately, Santa Clara did not have it in theirs, nor did San Francisco. So the only way we got the money was we put up our share, which was $40 million. We loaned the $40 million to San Jose, to Santa Clara County, for their share. We loaned $20 million to San Francisco for their share. And with that money, and then the state came up with the balance. It was $290 million. They came up with $109 million. And so we worked very hard to make sure we had it. It's really critical. That was why I was the one dissenting vote when we put a plan forward to put all the money in highways, and we know what's happening. And we see it in all these streets. And so to me, even the thought is horrifying to me that we even think of not having the service. As I said, I can tell you the names of people who will be very supportive of you on that, from key positions. I will tell you this, it was not Mike Scanlon. When I first came to TA, Jerry Hall was our executive director, and he retired. And I was part of this committee that selected Mike Scanlon. He was good. He lived over here in Selby. This was his station. And when we complained, I think Jim was with me when we complained about the lack of service at the critical times, which was really, I think, intended to bring our ridership down. Well, he said to me, he said, well, don't complain. He said, because I have staff members, he didn't identify who their labor really were, who wanted to cut down service. They don't like Atherton. They think we're a snotty little rich community, and they wanted to end our service. And that's what happened. And so that's why we don't, I will tell you this, and further, it won't take a lot more time, but the fact is that well, first of all, when they got our ridership down, they cut out all service to us, to 2 cities, Burlingame, Broadway, Burlingame, and Atherton. The irony of that is, It was Burlingame and myself, with Frank Powley and myself, were the ones that got the money to save the train. We're the two that lost our service. But it's because of two people. Mike Skellman says to me, you know, don't complain because I have people on my staff who want to cut service out of Atherton altogether. So don't complain. He said, I'm all for it. That's my station. He lived in Selby. That's where he caught the train. But he says, and I don't understand, when you're in charge, you let people. I was the commanding officer of a number of Navy units, and I never had people telling me how I'm going to make decisions on these things. You know, I mean, I think that having the history and involvement that I have, and knowing the people involved and what had happened here, it would be a horrible mistake. We need transit. We need a balance. We have more congestion. One of the days going back to work, my office was over at University in 101. I was coming back from a dental appointment at the wrong time, between 4 and 5, at Middlefield Road. It must be not more than a mile. It took me 1 hour, no exaggeration, an hour to get on University down to my office. I mean, that's what we're facing. Look at Marsh Road. I've had times in Marsh trying to get over to the post office and get caught at the wrong time there. And I can tell you, you all probably experience this. We have a serious problem. And I think that the only hope we have is that we have a balanced approach to things. The answer is not just driving cars. It's convenient and all, but I won't take a lot more time. I did a lot of work before this, and I've got a lot of notes on it, which I won't take more of your time on that. But to my way of thinking, it would, you know, we have a rail committee for one reason, because we have rail service, we have a station, we're concerned about impacts and all. And I will tell you one last thing, well, probably isn't the last, but another thing. I also, having been involved, when we put together the priorities, or the money was going to be spent, we raised the money with the Measure A. We decided on priorities, and of course one of the big ones was grade separation, because that's a real issue. It's going to become even more issue as you have more and more frequency of trains with high-speed rail and all. And so I knew what had happened, and there was a state, PUC I guess it was, they set out the priorities, who would be entitled to it. What we found is at that time, we didn't have to worry about prioritizing because nobody wanted grade separate because of the impacts. And so what I do know in the process of all those years, the one thing I will never forget is when the decision was made. You can't have trains, you know, some people going down underneath and some over. That doesn't work. You don't want a roller coaster effect. And so what happened was that with respect to San Carlos and Belmont, the decision was they were going to elevate it. You can't put it up for one city and down for another. And so that doesn't work. Well, let me tell you, of all my time I spent, I guess, a good many years on the TA. Well, I'm going to say this too. When we got that measure through, we had to get support of all the cities. I went to the voters, it got passed. And we needed to then disperse the funds. So that's when we created the TA. We needed someone to administer those funds. Naturally, then, having been a part of putting it all together, I was part of TA. I chaired that a number of years. And the most difficult time I had, the complaints, was in San Carlos and Belmont when they elevated for both of those. It's pretty ugly, as we know, and the businesses that were totally opposed, they have commercial there as well as residential. And I can't tell you how many complaints we used to get every meeting from these people. They said, what are you doing to us? How? Well, I can also share with you, there were plans, and I've got the plans, that would have elevated through Redwood City, Atherton, and Menlo Park. And if you want to wonder how that would look, drive down to San Carlos and Belmont. And so, you know, I think that if we didn't have service, I can tell you this, we would not have the same input as we do when we're getting service here. And that's a very serious thing, because having been involved with this and the decision process and the plans, I mean, I remember, this isn't the train, I remember, and probably you do too, dealing with these issues in transportation, not just the rail. Whipple Avenue became very crowded, and it had 2 lanes. And they said, well, I guess the answer must be to widen this. So what did they do? They widened it to 4 lanes, and guess what happened? Not surprising, it became too crowded as 4. Guess what happened then? Well, they made it 6. It's still too crowded as 6. That doesn't solve the problem. What they did, the plans, and I've got them, for Woodside Road, the plan was to double deck that. Can you imagine? And that was because Costco came in, and there was more traffic and all, and they were going to solve it, and that was all commercial on it pretty much, so that wasn't a problem. You could go from 101 and I forget how far it went, whether it went beyond El Camino. But we're talking about pretty serious issues, and I think for us, if we disengaged and we were not even had a station there, okay, I probably talked too long, but there is a long history, the importance for us historically. You know, I was looking through these things because, as I say, this was one of the most important things in 1980 that ever happened with our station. This is the first time. And the other thing I would say is that I was interested, history is important. This happens to be 1906, the very first spike for the Dumbarton Rail. And there's a lot involved, and I'm hoping that service is going to come about. It looks a little more promising now because Facebook is interested. But for us to even consider abandoning something that I think is that important for the service for us, and also we would lose the ability to have, in my opinion, you know, if we're concerned about that, we should be about the legislation. There's a better way to do this. You don't have this the old carrot and you know, club approach. You don't try to force everybody to do the same thing. It doesn't make sense. But there are ways you could do this. So many communities that would encourage the kind of added expansion and have a different legislation approach where you are providing incentives, not penalizing people to say you're not going to be able to follow your own rules, your own general plans. And it's not new for us. I mean, as you all know, Atherton has a housing element. We do have lower cost housing through Menlo College and Menlo. That's part of our plan that allows us to do this. Well, at the moment, I should turn that over.
Yeah, let's not talk about the housing element right now, because it's not on.
But anyway, but it's so critical to us. There's a long history. It's very important.
I got that impression, and I think everybody did, and thank you for the history lesson as well. Kerry wanted to say something, and we'll come back.
Thank you.
So I think this kind of breaks down to two different sections. One, does the town of Atherton, you know, the last 10 years we've been dealing with a lot of the traffic increases, and not by the jurisdiction, and it's the response. It's not our traffic, why are we getting all the traffic, and how do we deal with it, and dealing with all the development. And the mayor had mentioned, the proximity of this station makes more sense as a closer proximity to the Facebook campus, and that's 55,000 additional people in the near future. Does the town of Atherton want to accept the role of having, based on the numbers don't say we're going to have the ridership, but do we want to open the door for a public transportation component that could potentially be everybody else's growth, but we get the burden of the growth? And, or are we going to tell the other jurisdictions that are making the growth, accept the burden and responsibility of getting the people east to west from their stations to the sections where they're developing the growth? That's really a question, because with opening this, keeping the station open, we're mitigating their traffic problems because they're already pushing it to us. Menlo Park and Redwood City, this is the easiest way to get to Facebook. We know it because nobody wants to deal with Willow Road. Do we want Marsh Road to be the conduit for the Facebook campus, the 55,000 additional people? And does Atherton want to accept the responsibility of all the burdens that are going to go with that by having a station open? Setting aside the SB bills and growth on the corridor, do we want to be the station that is going to mitigate the growth of other decision makers and not us? Because right now, we've been chasing our ass for the last 10 years, saying how do we get the money and resources to handle the traffic problems that we have? What are we going to do when the station's open? And this does become a channel, because it is, the mayor mentioned it, it is the easiest conduit into Facebook. But yet, we don't get the revenue from the change of growth out there. We're the ones that are sitting here with the revenue sources limited to residential taxes to deal with the problem. That sets aside the SB bill component. If we do that, then we are going to be open for the next door, which is going to be high-density housing along the transportation corridor, because it simplifies that version of you've got a station, you're probably not going to be the key ridership, but yet you're going to be the one that's now going to be creating the housing component for that. Those two are going to go together. So that's the decision I think that we need to narrowly focus the town of Atherton on. Do we want to be the transportation component for the eastern growth and not having any of the benefits of it? So
I agree with you know, Kerry's comments. You know, one of our biggest problems is traffic, and traffic is not are people going in and out, but it's primarily the growth in the other jurisdictions that are around us. And with that traffic, there are issues, police costs, there's road maintenance costs, those type of things, and I think we need to take that into consideration, just from that standpoint, setting aside the SB 50. Now, we had a question or a comment from that, so feel free.
I think thematically you hit it, and I don't know who has what standing in this meeting. I'm just a resident, so this is a comment and a question. But I think that I agree with the point that train service is more valuable now to Atherton residents than it has ever been. I've lived here my whole life, and really just in the last couple of years, getting to the city and the lake is much more valuable. But I go to Menlo Park, I jump the express, I do it, and that satisfies what I would do. Having local access from Atherton to the city has, to me, no value. I'd never do it. And I think the point that you were making, I would underscore, which is, in listening to this, there is a big cost to Atherton for having the station, from the traffic or the residential zoning, and the value goes to other people. If they're coming in and having it as a transit corridor, that seems like we get all the cost and none of the benefit. A question I would have, maybe a suggestion is, I value us having access to it. Could we not just have a shuttle service, a bus shuttle service from the Atherton Civic Center going to Menlo Park and Redwood City, maybe to the point that taking the Atherton train station off the rails is valuable to Caltrain, maybe they pay for it, but having a Marguerite style just, back and forth to those hubs, which could be useful just for train or just for Atherton residents getting to commercial areas in connection with the new civic center that we're going in, would be, to me, an interesting civic value and would get, to me, most of the benefit for Atherton residents and for the cost.
Caltrain did used to offer something like that shortly after they closed the station.
It was almost never used.
Yeah, well, speaking as someone who rode the train for many years and who did make use of the shuttle when we had it, this was Greg Conlon right here, who suggested to Caltrain that they provide that shuttle, which they did for about 6 months, maybe, actually, it might have been as long as a year.
Zero use.
I rode the very last shuttle, the very last ride, and the very last day it was in service. When we inaugurated it, we had coffee service out there for everybody taking it. It was terrific. But the shuttle never got a whole lot of ridership. Let me tell you, I rode the train for many, many years. I bought my house where it is in Lloyd Park because I had access to the train station. I was working in downtown San Francisco. It was great accessibility, and it meant a lot to me. When we lost the service, at the time, I was working on the peninsula, and I wasn't using the train, but when I went back, started working downtown again, I went to, took the shuttle for a while, it existed, and then when it stopped, I would drive to Redwood City because it had more service, and of course I was going north anyway, so that was the way to go. And it was a real hassle. And I got up there one day, and it was October, and it started to rain. I looked around at the number of people standing on the platform and the size of the shelters that were there, and I realized that if I was going to continue to do that, there was not room in the shelters for all the people that were on the platform. I'd be standing there with an umbrella, getting my shoes wet, and then I get downtown, and you still have to get from the station to the business district. So that very day, I got a parking place in my building, and I drove, from then on. That continued until a year ago, when I retired from the firm I was with in San Francisco and just opened my own office down here in Redwood City. But let me go back to what Caltrain has done here. They have been telling us since day one, since they stopped the service, and by the way, Malcolm's absolutely right, they reduced the service slowly so that our ridership went down, and then they could say, oh, well, look how low it is, we're just going to close it completely. Now, all the time that they've been talking about electrification, they've been promising that this would mean restoration of service to Atherton. By golly, you're going to get it. If you look at the EIR that was done for the electrification project, there's a schedule buried way there in the back where they show a prototypical service that could be offered to all the stations, including Atherton. And there were like 1 or 2 trains per hour during the peak, if I remember, and an hourly service after that. Let me pass around. I don't have one for everybody, But this is what good train service was. You guys have already got a copy. Mike, why don't you pass them around that way? But every other person maybe take one around the table here. This is in 1990. Just so you know, because I think a lot of you don't really know what train service was really like when it worked. This was pretty much the schedule, I think, that we had when SP was operating it. And this was Caltrain by this time in 1990. And it's terrific service. We had, for example, I don't want to belabor the point here, but in the morning, northbound to San Francisco, we had service at 521, 610, 627, 639, 659, 728, 742, 804, 830, 930, 1030, and then it went on through the afternoon. And some of those trains were essentially express trains. The notion of the Baby Bullet and the express trains that Caltrain has now, the Baby Bullet was not a new concept. And they've had skip stop service where they stop at some stations and not others. They've had it going back to 1990, and the service was great. As I said, one of the reasons that I bought my house is because I could walk to the train and it was a great service. The notion of how many, I'm not so sure that Caltrain would immediately jump at the chance to stop service completely, because they've already stopped it. All the other stations, particularly Menlo Park and Rivet City, are getting seriously impacted.
They're getting what?
If they're seriously impacted, they're at their capacity. If you try to add more people or more riders to those stations, they're going to look to places like Atherton as an additional point where people could ride from. And if it provides a link to get to Facebook, we can discuss what that could mean and how we could deal with it, and what kind of negotiations we might be able to carry on with Facebook. And Elizabeth Lewis was involved with us when Malcolm and I were doing that years ago to try and get service back to Atherton using Facebook as a handle. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but let me tell you what is a bad thing in my mind, and that's just losing the service. Now let me tell you a little story. The last time I refinanced my house, a long time ago, I don't have a mortgage on it now, thank God. But when I did, and I did it several times, every time rates would change. And you go out, the bank gets an appraiser. So the appraiser comes out, looks at your house, and he goes and looks at comps. So he finds a house on a similar size lot, similar size house, style, age, maintenance, etc. Gets all these comps and comes up with a number, and then he reaches in the air and he pulls down a number, and he deducts a value based on the deleterious impact of having a train running through your town. So there's a negative to having the train there, and you're going to have that negative whether you have service or not. It's the train horn, it's noise, it's the rumble. You can feel it. You can feel the ground shake sometimes when they go past, especially the freight trains. You're going to have all that. And I realized that, of course, when I bought my house. But I also realized that, but to me, there's a benefit in being able to walk to the train station and take the train to downtown San Francisco. So there's an offset that if someone's out looking to buy houses, they're going to, they'll pay you less for your house, but and that might reduce the number of people that are interested in your house. But there's going to be some people out there that are looking for transit, and for whom it would be valuable. When we lost service, there was a discussion came up at the city council, which I was on at the time. I forget how it came up, but we were passing a resolution that one of the items was that it was impacting, it had to do with Caltrain, and it was that, it was impacting values. And someone in the city council said, well, that it wasn't just value, it was financial impact. And someone said, well, there's no financial impact from what they did, right? And I go, wait a second, yes, there is. When Caltrain stopped service, that's just like reaching their hands right into the pockets of all the Atherton residents that are impacted by the train, and that's an awful lot of people. You don't have to live right next to the train like I do. Anybody that can hear that train horn is impacted by the train. You're still going to suffer all those negative aspects. When they took the service away, they took value out of a lot of our people, a lot of people's assets, and the only way you're going to get it back, any of that, is to restore the kind of service that you had once before. So I'm not in favor of trying to get service permanently stopped. The other thing that I would say is one more comment. If the train was put in a trench or in a tunnel or something like that and could run through the town and not have any impacts, then I'd probably say fine. You put it in a trench all the way through town, I don't care if it stops here or not. Because then we'd be offsetting, we'd be mitigating as much of the negative aspects as we can. But that's not going to happen. Finally, let me address the SB 50 issue. I think, as Rick said, something like this is going to come down one way or another. Whether it's related to train service or transit stops or not, we have to watch out for it. And we can't avoid it too much because we're not Portola Valley or Woodside that are, off to the west, away from Highway 101, away from the trains, away from the congestion, away from all the commercial development. No, we're right here. We're right on the train line. 101's not far away. You got development going on all around us. There is pressure on us to do things, and it's always going to be there. I think we ought to have the train service to at least help us accommodate some of those pressures and give us some benefit from having the train run through here. But whether it's SB 50 or something like it, which has nothing to do with train service, SB 50 itself doesn't just talk about transit service, which refers to the train station. It also talks about something, I think it's high-value corridors, bus corridors, or something like that. I forget the term they use. But it has to do with a certain amount of bus service. And I went and I pulled up the bus schedules for El Camino. And it looks like El Camino may not fall into the definition, because their definition is something like 15-minute headways during 2 of the 3 morning peak hours and 20 minutes all the other time. And it looks like El Camino is only 20-minute headway. Middlefield, on the other hand, is right on the cusp. There's believe it or not, there's a bus line that runs on Middlefield pretty often. And it looks like that it might meet that 15-minute definition. So part of Atherton may well be within the transit service area that would affect or become operative if something like SB 50 went into effect, whether we have a train station or not. I think I'm done. And you've got a bunch of hands.
Are you done?
I think I'm done.
Okay, well, before we'll take Elizabeth.
Oh, I know.
And then-
I'm sorry. But that's what I was thinking of and just lost. Even if we, somehow said, stop Caltrain service, avoid SB 50, there's nothing to stop Samtrans from increasing the service on those bus lines to put us into the category. So I'd be very wary of thinking that having no Caltrain service is going to save you forever from something like SB 50.
So before we go to Elizabeth and then others, I want to make sure that Robert gets what he needs out of this, as we're certainly, we're 5:09, and we generally are pretty prompt about closing this right around 6 o'clock. So Robert, if you just kind of...
Well, I'm going to highlight a couple things that I've heard thus far, and that is related to growth projections, particularly here in Atherton, to get clarity on that. There seems to be a mix of opinions on the type of rail service that we might want in terms of weekday service or not. So that's still an item for feedback that we're looking for. And it's not necessarily something we need right now, but it's really a discussion as to how do we want to approach Caltrain. They're currently leaving that to be determined blank on their schedule. They've committed as part of their EIR to provide weekday service with the electrification. It's kind of in flux as to what that will be. That's still a conversation the town will have to have with them as that gets closer. One of the additional items is concerns regarding the frequency of trains that pass or whether or not they stop here in Atherton. Safety and other considerations related to that. So that's kind of the other aspect of it. So we have quad gates at Fair Oaks. There's been the desire for quad gates at Watkins to improve safety. One of the concerns staff has is looking at those future projections way out if they do actually get up to that larger level of train service, what that gate downtime will mean to our mobility in general. So.
Okay, all right. Elizabeth?
Okay, thank you. I think we have to, there's three comments I'd like to make, and a question. If the historical nature of the train station is certainly very, very important, I think, in my mind. If we let it go and let it go dead, would we ever in the future have an opportunity to bring it back? I think that that is something that we need to consider, because I just don't see that possibility. I think once you close down forever and ever, it's gone. Another comment to amplify what Mr. Jans was saying about, from the very beginning, Miriam, what was her last name? Miriam. Yeah, no, not Marion Oster, but the lady from the electrification.
Yeah.
Miriam.
Yeah.
She said, you will get your service back at a level of, 7 trains a day, in the commute hours, once the electrification. We promise. And that seems reasonable to me. I don't believe of, and I'm going to pick on my dear council colleague, Mr. Wiest, who threw out lots of numbers. That was, I think, a fear and mongering tactic about 55,000 ridership. We're going to bear the brunt of all of the development of the north, south, east, west with our little train station. I don't believe that would ever happen. I think that that's a big exaggeration. I think that there will be, obviously, more traffic than there is now, or has been over the last 10 years, because the service has been not there. But how would we manage that? But how are we going to manage the traffic that we have anyway? I mean, we really have a huge traffic problem. I understand sitting along Middlefield Road for an hour. I understand sitting on Fair Oaks, Atherton Avenue for 30, 40 minutes trying to get from this place up to Millbrae for another committee meeting after this meeting, and within an hour you just can't do it. So that's a whole nother issue that we have to figure out in our little town with the roads that were not meant for as an arterial thoroughfare. And your comment, Malcolm, about widening Whipple, widen. Well, of course, here they're widening Willow Road and the interchange, the overpass. But it's just a fact of life that we all have to deal with. But I really do not. As I grow older and living in Atherton, I will have more free time to go to the city and take the train. I won't want to drive to the city. And I think that there are more residents like that. I don't understand the whole concept about a shuttle, that I would get down to the train station and somebody would shuttle me to another train to go. I mean, if I can get down to the train station, probably go to the other train station anyway. But I really think that we have to think really hard about the ramifications of stopping it altogether. I'm not a big fan of that, of going down that path. I think that there are ways that we can manage the ridership increase, and I think it would be a good thing.
Okay, so many of us have had a conversation and had a chance to say something, and Jack and Tom?
Scott.
Scott, I will get with you, but I'd like to, normally have public comments, so we can take some comments from the public. If they would, due to time, if you could try and keep it to 3 or so minutes, I'd appreciate it.
I just got 2 quick comments. I won't be as long as you or Malcolm. One, and this, we're about to spend $40 or $50 million for a brand new civic center by the train station. Why do we want to clutter it up by being the transportation hub for Facebook, for which we get no compensation? I don't care how nice they are. I happen to not think they're even else can be their transportation hub. I don't know if you're aware of this. They already are violating rules, running their buses down Selby Lane and down Fifth Avenue, right through town, going in and out. You think they're going to do little shuttles here? You're nuts. They'll have those big buses here filling those trains up like crazy. Enough said. As you know, Malcolm, we're on the opposite side. Bigger deal.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
So I live near the train, so I understand, and recently I moved to the neighborhood, so I understand the appraisal issue. You have the downside of the train without the benefit of train service. On the flip side, I do see the traffic all the time in Paris, and I think it is an issue. And honestly, we think about, I'm actually not sure whether Facebook would even use this as an artery, because if I was, in my 20s in the city, I was getting on board the train, I don't know why I wouldn't just take a bullet to Redwood City and get on the bus. Because otherwise I'm creating more transfers along the way, or riding the local all the way down, or riding the Road City, transferring to Appleton, transferring to another bus. I don't know to me that doesn't make sense, because everybody in this room seems to agree that transfers are a bad thing, whether it's a shuttle or not. So I don't know how much is going to come from Facebook, but I also, I actually am more concerned about, ultimate congestion in SB 50. Maybe we need to look into whether that actually would affect us based on the bus stations. But that would really weigh in. I would personally like to have service open, if possible. I don't think we need it every 15 minutes. But if it did come to the fact of where it would be something that would prevent, bringing more multi-family units, I would wonder if those things.
Hi, my name is Roland. I'm from San Jose. You're probably wondering, what am I doing here? Well, I came here to listen and to your concerns, and then potentially come up with a bigger picture solution that's going to help everybody. So if you step back and you look at the facts, you're concerned with traffic, you're concerned with Senate Bill 50, and then you're concerned about becoming a Facebook hub, right? Then if you look at the Caltrain business plan, it's becoming very clear in that plan, is that if you don't have passing tracks in your station, you're not going to get a lot of traffic. Because if the train stops at a station, you're blocking the line. You have to be realistic. You've also got to remember, you're very close to Menlo Park. I used to take out to Menlo Park and walk already. Okay, so it's not that far. And you also, if you look at Redwood City, there is not enough room in downtown Redwood City for a large station with passing tracks. And there's also not enough room down there to have a Dumbarton connection. So what's the solution? 1 mile north from the station is a place called Redwood Junction. If you combine the right-of-way for Caltrain's 4 tracks, plus all the right-of-way that Soundtrans have, which goes all the way up there, you can build an absolute Facebook mega hub, which is only 1 mile from where you are now. So you can either walk, you can bike, take a shuttle, or do whatever. Okay? So my recommendation to you is to follow that route. Mega hub at Redwood Junction. Right? Now, another thing I want to talk to you a little bit about, is somebody from Palo Alto here. The council member, she's economical, we recognize it. But Palo Alto right now has got very many similar issues to you in terms of great separation, and same with Menlo Park. And they're looking at the tunnel. But they've also realized that if you have a tunnel and then you want to have underground stations, you're basically going to go the budget. It's just not going to work. But however, if you keep your station great, and then all the passing traffic, essentially the passing tracks, You moved up to a tunnel, now this is becoming more reasonable because you're looking in the ballpark, let's say for parking about $20 million. Now, the key here is that high-speed rail, believe it or not, they're actually going to back up Palo Alto everybody else on this. They have a legal mandate to go from San Jose to the transfer in Knoxville thinking 30 minutes. And if they don't, and they try to use proper guns, you, Atherton, are going to sue them. I know that for a fact. The Palo Alto tunnel is actually part of the solution that's going to make that possible. Because they'll be able to go through Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Atherton at 150 miles an hour, and nobody will notice it. But they have to get to that station at Redwood Junction. And if you look at the right-of-way, the amount of track that's available after Palo Alto start their tunnel somewhere in the south of Palo Alto, there is no opportunity for auto until you're north of Fifth Avenue in Atherton. Now, if you start looking at all the pieces together, I think, I hope that you will consider this and look at the big picture and consider working with your neighboring cities. So that's Redwood City, Menlo Park, and Palo Alto, and coming up together with this big solution that's going to address the passing tracks, the safety issues with this strange blasting through at 110 miles plus an hour, traffic and everything else, and also serve these three needs. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Comment?
Thanks.
Actually, I'm sorry to jump in, but he actually kind of stole my thunder a tiny bit, but that's okay. I actually have a similar, I agree with the gentleman, particularly on the potential for a station very nearby, but not actually in Atherton proper. And to echo, to sort of piggyback on his point, Clem, I forget his last name, but he's pretty well known. Yeah, thank you. He's pretty well known for his well-informed blog on transportation in the area. He's made some similar points about the population density around here. It just doesn't really justify a full-service station. I'm aware of the history. Like there was more traffic back when Caltrain was, before Caltrain tried to basically suppress usage of the station. But there are neighborhoods nearby that have the population density that support the station, and I think the gentleman's point sort of echoes that. That there might be, in terms of the station, there might be a middle ground where some Atherton residents actually get similar usage that they were accustomed to back when we were a full-service station, but actually helps surrounding communities. And that's actually something else I wanted to touch on, that our community, while I think I have a pretty strong track record on voting on many of the same issues, like opposition to high-speed rail and other issues, and I think I echo a lot of the same sentiments that many people in this community have on high-speed rail and others. There are things that I think we could do a better job of communicating that I think other communities share, like more to go with Malcolm's point, that I think we need to be more supportive of improving public transportation in this area and be a voice promoting it. I think not a lot of people know that there are many of us on the committee that want Dumbarton Rail to be a thing. There are, and speaking for myself, not as a committee, to kind of take it to the points that were mentioned as discussion points earlier, I think we should be agnostic potentially on the idea of having a third track through our town and be much more, because that feels a little prescriptive to me. Instead, I think we need to be more focused on protecting property rights. So in other words, if Caltrain can set up a third rail or a third track through Atherton, but not take any of our land, then I think we should not care, just simply because property rights go both ways. Caltrain does have property rights, and so do we. And if they can do it without impacting neighbors, I think we should be agnostic about that. And also supporting a third rail, for example, helps improve capacity along the right-of-way and helps potentially reduce congestion in the area potentially. So I think that we should try to focus on some of these areas where we can not only get agreement with many in Atherton, but even surrounding communities. The potential for adding a train station in a higher density area, which I think the area that the gentleman was talking about was around Fifth Avenue, is that correct?
Redwood Junction.
Redwood Junction.
Redwood
Where the
Junction.
Y is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I know where that is,
Yeah.
looking at the map. I think that we could be one of the voices that supports a move like that, which would also involve working with Redwood City and would also show that we're actually pro-transit, which historically Atherton has actually been very pro-public transportation, but I think that message has been lost over the years because of the debate on high-speed rail, which I think is, not to take us too far off. I support all the work that we've done to try to resist high-speed rails. I think it's a bad deal for the community. But I'm going to finish up. Just the one final point, though, just briefly on the station. I think as it currently stands, the station is a bad deal for both us and nearby communities. We get the worst of both worlds. We get very little service, but we get all the downsides associated with having the station, especially the rail noise and the horns and so forth. I'm not adamantly opposed to full service, although I question whether we would get, whether the trade-offs are worth it. But I do know what the trade-offs would be if we either closed or the station was moved. And that approach feels more palatable to me, would be a station move that was near to us. That seems like a good middle ground that sort of solves all the problems as near as I can see. So anyways, that's where.
Thanks. Greg, you wanted to add something?
Well, the first thing I want to do, I've been sitting at this table for 10 years, and I want to applaud Malcolm. You said more tonight than you did in the entire 10 years. You should have said it sooner. You should have said it sooner. But I applaud you for your comments because they're very much appreciated. Jim, you come in there a little bit too. You and Malcolm and I had some great comments, and I applaud you. After sitting here for 10 years, you guys may have sat here for 3 hours, but I've sat here for 10 years listening to these guys, and I appreciate what you've done. Redwood City and the Dumbarton Bridge, I mean, Facebook is going to revive that. It's going to Redwood City. So whether it goes to the Redwood Junction or whether it goes to Redwood City, I mean, we shouldn't be involved. They got the track running right past Atherton. We don't have to pick up Facebook. They're doing it on their own, on Dumbarton. So just take that track all the way to Redwood City, and it's out of our bailiwick. Marsh Road is just ridiculous. It's Stanford Hospital that's causing that traffic. So we're worried about Facebook. That's not what's causing the traffic on Marsh Road. It's Stanford Hospital. You take a survey of those cars that are turning left off Marsh Road onto Middlefield. I'll bet 90% of them are Stanford Hospital. So we just should get mitigation from them. And I don't know. The SB 50, I think the only way you're going to stop that is with an initiative. And I don't know if an initiative would fly because the populace would probably favor what they're trying to do, but I think it's going to ruin residential property in every upscale community in California. So but initiative would be a solution to fight it. And I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but if you don't like it, I think initiative's the only way you're going to stop it. So I'll stop it.
All right, so I did have a question that maybe we could ask. And if we had service restored, I know that they only had the dot, the gray dot in the local stops, which would take an hour to get to San Francisco. Is there any possibility of getting any express service? Because I would think that express service is more valuable to residents than local service. Local to local, I mean, no one wants to sit on a train going up and down for 2 hours, have 2 hours wasted, and then have to get on the Muni or find your way to get off and get onto a BART, and then again, take an hour and a half to get anywhere downtown San Francisco. So, I would like to have that question answered before we, weigh all the other ideas. And then, the question is, are those passing track locations that actually don't have any in Atherton, how firm is that? Because, expansion of the track and acquiring land for me is a problem, and not only, for us, but it would be a problem whether we have a station or not for our residents, and they need to be aware of that. And then there were a couple of questions about trenching, rising up, and things like that. Did you want us to go over those, or you think that it was primarily just the information on the service or not service? My last comment is that I agree with what many of the people have said. I mean, I'm concerned about SB 50, but there are other initiatives that have already been passed that do similar things. And if this one doesn't pass, there'll be another one. And, as it's pointed out, even if you read it, there are not restrictions, but initiatives for low-cost housing on bus routes, as Mr. Jans has pointed out, in a 30-minute interval, 20-minute interval, 15-minute interval, and each of those has a radius of where these development agreements would take effect. And the only relief potentially is the item that we could have a public forum and have maybe delay any sort of implementation till maybe 2025 if we start a process where we're discussing how and where we want to go do that, which would be, I think, maybe if we have another discussion, council discussion on SB 50, I think that that's something we should probably explore. But with regards to the train service, I'd like to know, could we improve the service and other than just local to local, and go from there.
Like I say, as shown on the exhibits here, the stops on the express trains are rather limited in both options, predominantly to keep things moving up and down to their central hubs. And those stations, there's only a couple of stations that key into where the high speed rail is, and that's at Millbrae and in San Jose, as well as San Francisco. But looking at the stations where they plan to stop on those express trains, they're not, though they're planning one in Redwood City, the next one south is in Palo Alto. They're not going to put another stop in between, it doesn't appear.
No, but they could replace a Redwood City or Menlo Park and say, okay, we would have it at Atherton, and that would increase the ridership there, because if that's the right time, you would drive to the Atherton station. Now, the next issue would be the parking. We've reduced the parking around the Civic Center, because we're growing the Civic Center area, and the parking is actually cut by what, 25%, something like that?
Quite a bit, and there's only 30 Caltrain spots.
Yeah.
So looking at this, the Caltrains, the spots that are on Caltrain property are solely those ones right along the track. And so trying to increase that, the infrastructure isn't really there to support a full station for bullet train service.
If I could, just a question going in the other direction, which is, if we were to eliminate the station, what happens to that land and those parking spaces? Would there be an opportunity to fold that into the Civic Center plans with some kind of beautification, or I don't know, something else?
Those are all, I mean, if the council wanted to go that direction in terms of negotiating, there's a host of things that could be part of that conversation.
Well, perhaps we
one
should
of
ask
which is potentially the land, other improvements in the area, whether it's the quad gates, trying to speed that up. They spend money maintaining certain things there.
But specifically, they own 30 parking places, right? Would they continue to own that? And is that something we could somehow exercise control over, or that'd be a negotiation, or what do you think?
It would be part of the negotiation.
Okay.
Related to that, can a government entity apply eminent domain on another government entity?
Not on a railroad,
What's that?
not on a railroad.
They can work on us.
Yeah. Okay.
We can't work on them.
Okay.
Okay, here's,
I guess I've got a somewhat different slant on some of this. People are concerned about SB 50. People are saying, well, if we eliminate the station, certain things happen. If we arrange to have higher ridership, other things happen. I have two thoughts on that. Number one, it's sort of fashionable to suggest that a lot of government initiatives to solve problems are sort of wrong-headed and have undesirable consequences. The Bay Area is facing housing shortage, both all kinds and low cost. It's facing serious transportation problems. And SB 50, whatever its merits, quirks, effects on us, seems to me a decent, appropriate approach that deals with those three important problems. And if our motivation for eliminating the station is to get out from under SB 50, I don't think that's being a very good corporate citizen or municipal citizen. I think that sort of plays into the general view of Atherton as being a bunch of elitist, isolationist fat cats. And it bothers me. So, I don't want a 5-story apartment building next to my house either, but there is a paragraph at the end of SB 150 that I think you were alluding to, which says a town, in lieu of being subjected to those requirements, puts together, in conjunction with its neighbors and community planning, an approach that in effect achieves the same effects on transportation and housing as this would, then you can do in a way that you may prefer to sort of waiving all of those restraints on the whole thing. And I think we ought to pursue that. And when we say, well, what kind of a station do we want? If we have a station, a full service, a partial service, and on the difference in viewpoint of what's likely to happen between Councilman Lewis and Councilman Weiss just means I think we don't have enough facts. And some sort of an analysis ought to be done of what would happen. Would the surrounding communities pour all their traffic through here? Or would the fact that, maybe a lot of that traffic's already going through here. There's still plenty of people who drive single occupancy cars to Facebook. Maybe it would reduce them. I don't know. I think we need more facts, and I think we should pursue an approach that says, all right, SB 50, for whatever it is, seems to be trying to do right things. Is there a way this community can participate in doing right things in a way that may be more attractive to us than what SB 50 might impose?
So, thank you for letting me speak. John, I want to echo, I think your approach is really thoughtful and reasonable. The trade, we use that in our housing element negotiations. When our RENA, the regional housing negotiations for the housing elements, if Redwood City only has X numbers allotted to them, and we've got more than what we want, we'll go and try to horse trade with them and give them ours, and then they can build more that they want. And Hillsborough, we've done this in the past, so I think that that's a good approach to that. The other thing I want to say about the SB 50 and the fact that I put my little developer hat on and think that, okay, if I have an opportunity to build a 5-story apartment building in Lloyden Park, which is kind of close to the train station and everything, would I really want to do that? Because there are no amenities around. We don't have a shopping center, we don't have grocery stores, within walking distance. you have to, get in a car, take a train to Redwood City to do your shopping or something like that. I just don't know that that is something that would be that attractive. And would you really be able to build a big enough transit-oriented development in the residential area? So I guess you could, but I mean, you look at what Deke Hunter's doing at the old Roger Reynolds nursery site. Now, that's a home run because it's a big enough site, and it's right there by the train, but yet it's close to Menlo Park. I mean, it's like, just down the road. So I think that we should certainly keep our eyes open and watch the process of it. But anyway, and what else? I think that's it about the SB 50. I wanted to say.
Jack, you've been wanting to say something for a
Yes.
while.
Yes,
You go in and out of view because you got the projector there, so go ahead.
We've been talking about two types of issues tonight, primarily station and service related. There's also the SB 50 related items. As far as the station and service, we've got until at least 2020 to resolve that, and maybe much longer, because I think electrification is going to take longer than scheduled rather than less time than scheduled. SB 50 is probably going to be voted on before 2020. Maybe this year, maybe another year. But I think what SB 50 does is makes Big Brother determine the zoning of local communities. The way it's written, it applies to all local cities. There are 1,350 cities in California. Should all of them be subject to SB 50? Or should only the largest ones be subject to SB 50, where it'll have the most impact on affordability and density and so forth? So I think, although I don't think we should have SB 50 at all, I believe in complete freedom, I think we ought to try for a compromise that says SB 50 applies to cities with a population more than X. I don't know what X is, but X should be determined so that it addresses most of the problem without addressing most of the cities. And I think we ought to lobby the League of Cities. We've got the Peninsula Group of Cities to see if we can't get the scope of SB 50 narrowed down to where it'll have the most meaning. And I suggest that maybe we have another meeting focused on SB 50, and probably many more meetings between now and 2020 focused on our schedules and service to Atherton.
No, I agree. I think we all agree we need to have another meeting on SB 50 and what it means, and we'll have that as a study session, but can't make any decisions on that here because it wasn't on our agenda. But I agree with you. As several of us said, let's go ahead and let's understand what it is, let's understand how it applies, and what flexibility there is, what should we be doing, and what type of planning do we need to make? Because even as Rick said very early in the meeting, if it's not this one, there's going to be another one, because the goal is to get people out of cars. The freeways are too high, are too crowded, and we want people to take mass transit. And I think Carrie said that as well. So, and that's been something that I've read about for 10, 15 years, I think, or longer. That's what the goal is of the state legislature. So.
Oh, let me add one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reason there's an affordability of housing problem in California, San Francisco, Los Angeles is because this is a nice place to live. people want to live here. And the things we do to make housing more affordable is going to attract more people to California and make the problem worse. So I'm not sure that that's the ultimate remedy.
Well,
I just wanted to address just one thing that I think is determinative here. I think that the technical realities are that it will be impossible for Caltrain to provide service to small stations like Atherton, College Park. They cannot run the number of trains they have and meet increased capacity. Kerry's shaking his head because he's very technically knowledgeable. It's going to be physically impossible. We are debating a non-issue. They will not be providing weekday service to Atherton, to College Park. They have denoted that on their Caltrain business plan in the gray dots. They can't do it. And when the fact they have scrapped, they have written off $235 million for CBOS, their system which was going to use GPS to track and control the trains. They have scrapped it. It's failed. They have no way to make it happen. We are talking about something that really is a very unlikely possibility. And I think that needs to be explored. Thank you.
Do you want to say anything about that, Gary?
We're talking about 2040 numbers, and so we're getting an option today from Caltrain to say, hey, give us an idea of ridership. But the reality is, all the jurisdictions that feed into that system have ridership well above anything we could imagine, even if we opened up high-density housing. Everybody else is so far ahead of us as far as high density is concerned. Those numbers, even all the jurisdictions that sit down and talk about it, they say the numbers are not even anywhere where they think they are. Meaning the projections they think Caltrain has is conservative. Sunnyvale says, "Are you kidding me? We just approved 7,000 units." So I know it's a hypothetical number here, but it's a scary scenario when we're talking about transportation. I think we all can agree we wanted public transportation is right. I think we all want a good system, which the system stinks. Let's just say it, the system stinks. So adding more riders and more downtime and the intervals between stops and the number of trains, the probability is if you're on the low number, no matter what, you're going to be one of the first jurisdictions that they're going to say, let's get rid of them. And before they spend a lot of money on the station to get level platforms and everything else, they want to have that discussion before they waste money based on their projections. So I think that's why this conversation is even occurring, is because before they dump money, and we have two roadway crossings, Fair Oaks and Watkins, that are really close together. With the volume of traffic, is it better for the residents to have trains that go through or trains that stop and then crossing gates go down for how much traffic is going to be able to actually cross the tracks from the number of trains and the volume based on those predictions? It's hard to say because we're making a decision or looking at decisions on a 2040 figure. So it's harder to digest even when you see it every day, So it's a big picture concept, and you're right. What's coming? It's coming. It's just if we want to benefit the system, are we benefiting the system by demanding ridership to be here, or allowing a jurisdiction left to right of us that has far more development components to accept a stop? It's the stop that costs money and time. So therefore, should the jurisdictions that have way ahead of us, and they will always be because they have more mixed-use housing and everything else, we don't, they, in essence, if they are able to pick up 500 or 1,000 at a station, it's going to be far better than whatever we could do in our vision.
So I think that, just one comment, in the pack that you put together, Robert, there was, of course, the high-speed rail area, and they had comments from some of the cities. And I think many of the comments that were in there, in addition to the service question, how much, what, could we, and what would be the ramifications if the station were closed or we left it open, and the analysis there. The noise, the traffic issues, those type of things, those same comments that were in those high-speed rail comments from Gilroy and the other communities that San Jose. I think that those are issues that, since they want to know what our concerns are, those are essentially our same concerns.
There has to be a high-speed rail stop close to Facebook and Google, and there's not one. And I think that logically it should be in Palo Alto, where you've got the downtown area ready to take it. And if you had a stop at Palo Alto, you could bring people from Tracy and Fresno to Palo Alto in less than an hour. And you wouldn't have the congestion in these other cities along the way, because it would all be concentrated in one high-speed rail stop. And I will go to Palo Alto next week and make that argument, because I think that's what's.
Caltrain, not high-speed.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, in the planning report for 2040, they've put a train traffic in there that they can never achieve. They made commitments on platform heights that will make it difficult to get rapid platform in and out. They have a bicycle problem that they argue about every month, and I'm sure we'll do again tomorrow.
Handicap access to it.
The idea of having 16 trains an hour in each direction on a two-track system with as many third rails as they want to put in, it just can't happen. It's physically not possible. That will require four tracks down the whole peninsula if they're ever going to come close to the volumes they're looking at in 2040.
So Paul, one of the questions I had when we went over the pack was, you all had a December meeting and essentially had a vote with the Rails Committee suggestion or recommendation was have full service restored.
Yes, sir.
Is that still y'all's?
That's the position of Atherton, and we saw at that time no reason to change that.
But that was before we heard more about SB.
If I could, on that, I know Rick wants to talk, and I apologize, but that's the point I wanted to get to, is that we currently have a policy, right, which is we want full service restored. And I guess I'd like to understand what process we're going to go through to evaluate that, decide whether that should still be our policy or not. I think we need to do that. So I guess that'd be my question, I guess to you, Mr. Mayor. Or, can we just get an answer to that? And probably, Paul, but just a short answer, and then we can go. Is there an answer to that?
Well, we can add that added to a
We can
discussion.
put it on a future agenda. We have a recommendation from the Rail Committee that can be brought forward for
That
consideration.
recommendation is prior to any of the knowledge, that's what we're saying. Prior to the recent
Okay.
developments, it's
So-
out of date.
So
We
if,
just-
if the council desires, we could just put something on your calendar to have a conversation about the rail
Is that
policy.
what this is?
I would like.
Well, I
And
think
that's
that-
what you can,
Well, if the Rail Committee wants to discuss it first and then make a recommendation, I think the council should probably ask the Rail Committee in the next month or so to look at this, come back with a recommendation, we can then put it on our policy, just the same as we did when we were looking at the litigation and the high-speed rail and some of the electrification issues that were in there, and we made a modification. Do you think that's okay?
Well, yeah, and that's entirely proper, because this is a moving problem, and they're probably going to want to have several changes. As was mentioned, SB 50 did not exist when we had our December meeting, so we had no knowledge that was coming back. We thought that had been dead and buried last year. And so we were working from that viewpoint. Now, the situation has changed. I think we need to keep a contemporary policy that is as close to supportable facts as you can get.
Okay.
And there's a lot of conjecture in this that is made both by contractors and by the different agencies that we have to take with a good deal of salt. And we will try and introduce as much of that as we can, but we're not perfect by any means.
So George and Robert?
yeah, we'll put it on the next rail agenda.
You think
That works. I mean, the town's current commission committee policy requires that once there's a recommendation, it moves up to the council
Yeah,
in
right.
a meeting or two. But if the rail committee wants to look at it again in light of SB 50, we can do that and put that on their future agenda for them to discuss.
Hey, Bill,
Fine.
I'll say something.
Yeah,
about
sure.
that. So,
Sorry, I didn't see
you know,
you.
Today, we've mostly talked about the issue of service, and that is, got a couple bullet points in our rail policy, and I'm glad that the rail committee will discuss that and give us a recommendation. The other thing that I think should be discussed is the way that the quad gates at Watkins are brought up. The most significant thing that we have done on this council in the last 5 years around rail policy, and maybe since Caltrain service began, was to establish the quiet zone at Fair Oaks. I have gotten more emails from people about how that's benefited their lives than any other single thing we've done on this council in the last 5 years. And I think that it's very important for the way that we bring up the possibility of quad gates at Watkins to not be couched in the context of a quiet zone at Watkins, but be couched in the context of improving safety along the rail corridor and establishing quad gates at Watkins. So I think I've sent around a little piece of paper with a recommendation on how to change that bullet point in the rail policy. We don't need to discuss it now because I'd be very happy for the rail committee to talk about it when you next meet and give us a recommendation so we can evaluate changing the policy on all the bullet points.
Good point. All right, so what else do you need from us, Robert?
Perhaps I could summarize a little bit. So Robert's going to come back to you with some specific comments on growth projections and our comments back to Caltrain with respect to that. We've already commented through the ABAG process on that same set of numbers, but we'll do that again. Specific comments on the impact of east-west gate downtime issues, traffic impacts, concerns about noise, those other comments with respect to HSR and other Caltrain issues, we'll promulgate those up as well. Craft that into some sort of letter, bring that back to the council for comments. With respect to the SB 50 issue, SB 827 failed out of committee 7-4. SB 50, we don't know where that's going to go. It's just been introduced. So maybe the council at its next meeting, when it looks at that letter, could also consider forming a little subcommittee to go meet with our state legislature folks to talk about SB 50 and then bring that back to the council for feedback, for additional comments to add to the letter to go back to Caltrain. And then with respect to the station and comments back to Caltrain, that I got mixed perspective from the council.
And I think it's going to be an ongoing discussion.
Yeah, it's going to be a continuing conversation. When we bring the letter back, we can continue that conversation as well. What I heard tonight so far was the cost to maintain the station may be greater than the benefits, that there's, why should the town bear the burden of growth of regional communities at our local location, concerns about traffic and gate downtime, regional solutions rather than continuing with a local solution, looking at that upstreet mega station. Closing the station won't alleviate the town's concerns with respect to the eventual provision of affordable housing along transit corridors. Will still be impacted if SB 50 passes. There's still the perspective of Middlefield or El Camino. And the possibilities of negotiating now with Caltrain for issues of benefit to the town is better now versus after the station is potentially open and then service is cut. So those are some of the comments.
And then we also talk about, when we talk about SB 50, there is that provision in the last page that talks about should we really have a public discussion and a public forum to start looking at this and set a process in place, because that could save us. There will be another SB 50, as you know.
Yep.
So we should try and get ahead of the game.
Right, and if we could, when we have that state legislator conversation, if the council's interested in doing that, those are the things we should continue on that conversation. That's
okay. Malcolm wanted to add something.
I'm afraid that my comments has created some confusion with respect to Facebook. Our approach to Facebook was based upon our desire to try to increase ridership, if that was the basis for having our service restored. So it was we who went to Facebook, not them coming to us. And if we are not working with them, they're not going to be doing it. We're not worried about shuttles coming in here unless we want that to happen. The only reason we wanted to have that happen was because we wanted to build the ridership, if that was the issue. It shouldn't have been, but nevertheless. So I don't want people to leave here thinking, oh my goodness, we have to worry about Facebook. We don't unless we decide we need to do that for the ridership. So I think that's important.
Build it, they will come. It won't be very long if you have those people coming on the train now, they're gonna go to their office and say, geez, we got 50 people getting off in Atherton and they gotta take bicycles or get Uber. Geez, couldn't we get a big shuttle over here?
Well, in any case, that isn't what their focus has been. It was a response to our desire to improve ridership. And the second thing that we've not mentioned is that we as a city, town, every year our taxpayers here pay about $547,000 for Caltrain. We're paying for a service we're not getting. We were getting that before. We've supported Measure A and the renewal of Measure A. But that's not insignificant. We put a lot of money into that, and it seems to me reasonable that we should expect to get something for that. So there is a cost to us, to our residents. That's what we put into that. We put, just under $10 million over the 20-year period of the first Measure A. Not insignificant. So we have made a huge investment. We will continue to make an investment over $500,000 every year, and we ought to be getting service for that. And so for me, there are enormous benefits. There is a cost to us, and we should be getting something for that.
Good points. Any other comments, questions?
Well, I think we should get our supervisor here, who represents us for our, the supervisors now are by region, they're not countywide. So we have one supervisor that represents our town, and I think he should be part of the process. It's Horsley, I think, is the person. They got Measure K money, which is extension of Measure A, and they've got a lot of money left over. They could handle Watkins in 10 minutes by giving the money. So and they've got it. So I think we need to get them involved. They've got 2 sales tax passed in the last 2 years. That's $160 million a year going into the county for no specific purpose. So I think that we could, if we could get him involved to represent us, that there's money there that he could help us.
I think Redwood Junction is in the county, and that's just right at the Middlefield, North Fair Oaks. They're going to redo the entire Middlefield Road and area. There's plans for beautifying Middlefield Road.
Bury all the power lines.
Yeah, bury all the power lines. I mean, there's going to be a huge infrastructure project up there. So I think, and there's rail already there. So I think that's kind of a brilliant idea, worth looking at. Hadn't thought of that. Wish I had, but I didn't. But I can get on the bandwagon.
Carrie wanted to make a comment.
I just wanted some staff clarity on, Malcolm mentioned a figure of $500,000, and I know that we do get revenue from, so when you mention $500,000, it's not as if we don't get something. We actually, last year, I think, got 300 and...
Measure A funds?
Measure A funds, like 300.
That's totally separate, though. That's separate. The other is out of the Hassett sales tax. We were part of creating that, so I know exactly how we worked that, and that's different.
So you're talking the sales tax that residents pay when they shop?
That's it. The Hassett sales tax is part of Measure A.
In Redwood City or other communities.
Yeah, so that's separate.
All right, just
Bill?
didn't know.
If I could, I just going over George's list in my head of the things that we're getting back to. One of the things I don't think I heard you say that I'd like to know at least, as we look at the costs and benefits of service levels and everything else, closing the station, I'm still not clear on what the benefits are for us. Would we actually potentially be able to obtain land, or is that something that could build into the city? Because I just want to understand that process better. Understanding we'd have to negotiate with Caltrain, but what's possible and what's not would be a helpful thing in that.
I think the issue there is, it appears to me that it's in Caltrain's desire to terminate the service, or else they wouldn't have had the statement in their business plan that it was to be determined whether there would be service to Atherton. And what is, if you were to follow that logic, right, then what would they do with that station? They own that land. And they have to have some concept about that. I think we should inquire about that.
It'd be nice to know.
I think it's still Bill, you did a little, let's see, Attorney Bill, a little bit of research on the land rights. Is Caltrain have the rights to use it, or do they actually own it? I thought that rail still owned it.
Well, it was Union Pacific.
It's just like all of our public agency streets. We don't own any streets, but we have right-of-ways over all the streets. They may actually, I know in Monterey, the city of Monterey, the city actually owns some of the fee title to the streets. So it's different everywhere. My understanding is that Caltrain owns the property, and under CUP rules, it doesn't matter if the owner just have a right-of-way, they control it. I mean, we have no ability to tell them what to do. Now, I think what we're talking about here is, do you have the ability to negotiate with them to use their property? Well, everything's for sale, or everything. I mean, they won't sell it to you, but what they'll do is they'll negotiate the use of their parking spaces if that was something we needed.
I think in the long term, though, what we're thinking about is, if we eliminated the station, trees, safety provisions, berm for sound, noise walls, those sorts of things for protection in between us and the Civic Center and the rail corridor for public safety purposes. So if Caltrain isn't able to give us the land, could we then develop on the land in those
Something
ways?
like that, or would they face the possibility where they could just say, well, you know, forget it, we're gonna put on it whatever we want, you know, we got a parking garage or something, I don't know what,
I'm
something.
assuming they own it, and in other jurisdictions where I've worked, and they own the railroad right of it, they were able to sell it or transfer it to the local agency,
Oh, boy.
depending on what suited them.
What can we find out?
On the map,
Yeah,
there is a map, and on the legend, it says they own, that Caltrain owns, the JPB owns that strip over along the corridor.
But I'd be careful, though, that there's not some sort of reversionary interest in
That
terms
if
of the
they
rail
don't use it,
corridor.
it'd come back.
I thought Union Pacific owned it.
Right. The rights to go back to them before they can sell it.
Well, but there's an answer, can we, when the council looks at it, it'd be nice to know what
Yeah,
that,
we should
you
know,
know,
we
what
should
that
know
answer is.
what the deal is with the land. If they choose not to provide service, what are our rights to acquire that, make a park around the historic station, put a sound berm in, or what? You know?
Right.
Or they say, well, you know, we're gonna use it, or we have to follow the state's rules on abandonment,
Exactly.
which
We'll
means
go
there'll
that
be
route.
an Indian casino.
Well, it was Southern Pacific, not Union Pacific. It was Southern Pacific, and so that was what we used to measure funds for. The TA bought it for $209 million, as I recall, and we put up 40 million, loaned 40 million to Santa Clara, loaned 20 million to San Francisco. That was the 100 million in addition to the counties, and it came through the TA through those measure funds. But TA isn't permanent, it has to be renewed. Therefore, we could not take the title. So what we did, we gave the title to Samtrans, because they are permanent. They came in legislation prior to the change of the law. So it is under the title of, well, we actually had the acquisition. We also, the Dumbarton was an option. The extension from San Jose to Gilroy was an option. And that was the money those were exercised a little later. So it is owned by, actually, Samtrans in title. It was the money came through TA, but we weren't permanent, therefore that was how that worked.
Was the right of way along the track?
That's the title, yeah.
We also do dump.
Yeah, and and the Gilbert.
So, I think we're essentially talked out on this subject, and so I'd like to thank everybody, unless somebody has a pressing, urgent closing comment.
So moved.
If not, we'll take a.
So just, what are the next steps? So in February, we'll have a rail meeting, we'll discuss something.
What's our meeting?
It's next month.
First Tuesday of February.
No, February.
But it's February.
So the